Alright, welcome back to the second part. First we have Iceberg Mason, 2-3 Yeti. 2-3 is a pretty decent base deadline, especially for a more mid-rangey Yeti deck, because it blocks really well against early units. The ability is, like the summon effect, is really weird and interesting. Move each Yeti in your deck one card closer to the top is like a really weird incremental value type thing. It's kind of cool that they come up with these like really outside the box interesting new ways to use the digital space. I mean, stuff like that would never be possible in a paper card game, but I would have to play with it to see if I feel like it does enough. But I think the 2-3 stat line alone might be okay enough that this doesn't have to do a ton to make this guy a reasonable 2-drop option in a Yeti deck. And it might actually be that this ability is amazing. Who knows? It's also kind of hard to test, but it's definitely a cool design idea, I think. And in limited, I mean, a 2-cost 2-3 is already pretty nice. The fact that it's a Yeti and might help you a bit with some of your other Yetis is a nice addition. But yeah, it's a decent pickup in draft. Not great though. Next we have Storm Talisman. This is sort of an interesting one. I think this might belong to the cycle of the relics that we had in Time and Fire for the Sentinels and Explorers, but I'm not sure if they like kind of count together. On summon we get Scout, so we basically get a 2-cost Scout effect, another 2-cost Scout effect with at least additional value compared to, say, that other bad Scout effect, Ask for Direction, that we saw in Time. And once per turn you can pay 8 to deal 2 damage to an enemy way later in the game. Unfortunately, I think, at least in Constructed, this is too little early on and also too little too expensive later on, so I don't think it's gonna do anything. But in Limited, this might be a nice thing, especially if you care about relics, and this can like really take over the game later, shoot down small opposing units, or simply just hide behind your blockers and shoot down the opponent slowly. So in Limited, in a more defensive, slower deck, this looks pretty nice for like a control deck in draft, for example. Next we have Strategize. This is pretty amazing. In Magic this was called See Beyond, basically, and it shuffled the card back in your deck. Here we just put it on the bottom of your deck, which is kind of like removing it from our deck, especially in this game where there's no shuffle effects. I assume the reason why they put it on the bottom rather than discard it is to not give us too many discard outlets for cards like Privilege of Rank and some reanimation type, Synergy, Stonewalker, and so on, to not make this too strong, because the card is pretty good and playable the way it is, and if it would synergize beneficially with some other cards, it would become extremely good, like better than they want apparently. But yeah, drawing 2 and getting rid of the worst card in your entire hand afterwards is a pretty good deal for 2, even at spell speed. So this is something I think a lot of people and a lot of decks in this game have been waiting for. Some more card selection, card draw, to help you ease the variance of the game. Pretty great. And in Limited, I think it's probably a bit worse in Limited than in Constructed actually, because it's a bit dirtly, but if your deck is on the more controlling and defensive side, this is great. But it's just not for every draft deck, I think, possibly. Alright, next we have Twilight Hermit. It's a 2-cost 1-1, not a relevant unit type. When you start your turn at night, transform Twilight Hermit into a 5-3 brawler with Reckless. So basically, Eternals take on a werewolf. Although, the problem is, the turn you play this, like if you play this on turn 2, you cannot trigger Night. So it can't attack on turn 3 as a 5-3, which is probably what they were intending, since attacking on turn 3 with a 5-3 is pretty brutal. So you have to wait one turn longer. The problem is a bit that you're basically skipping your second turn, because you get a 1/1 that cannot do anything in combat in a relevant fashion without dying, and you don't want it to die because you want the 5/3. And yeah, it doesn't enable itself, so you need to have enough night enablers. But by turn 4, you basically get a 2-cost 5/3 with Reckless that is attacking, which isn't the worst deal. Probably a bit too many hoops to jump through and too fragile and constructed, too vulnerable to too many things, Varus favor, silence, and so on, to be worth all the effort. But in limited, if you have enough Nightfall enablers, this can be a pretty powerful card, I think. Next we have Unseal, basically everybody's favorite new upgrade to Backlash. Instead of dealing 2 damage to the enemy player, we get to also negate curses, which is amazing. A great answer to Azindel's Gift and some other minor curses like Permafrost and so on. So this is a pretty, and some of the new curses. This is basically going to be the new go-to counterspell for decks that are looking for counterspells, usually because the 2 damage didn't matter much in the decks that played Backlash outside of, say, Felon Tempo. And even there, Unseal might be better because stopping a Permafrost is pretty good in that deck too. Next we have Winter's Grasp. This card is a bit awkward, basically a bad Permafrost if you ask me. First, costing double is a pretty big downside. Once again, Nightfall, you have to be proactive and low curve enough, I think, most of the time, and have enough synergies for it to be worth it. And then this is also super unreliable, since the unit is only stunned at night. And it's going to be hard to keep up night long enough for this card to reliably do its job. So I am not sure it's going to be playable. It might be in like a Nightfall heavy sort of tempo aggro deck where the game only lasts a limited amount of turns and you usually can keep up night long enough for this to do the job you want it to do, and at the same time help you enable all your other Nightfall synergies, but I remain skeptical. And in draft, it's like, yeah, you really need a lot of Nightfall cards and also enough payoff for Nightfall in case this is just gonna be a 1-turn type deal that the Nightfall summon effect at least does enough for you in the process. Next we have Yeti Windflyer. That's a pretty amazing Yeti 2-drop actually. Yeti Alley turns it into a 2/2 flying for 2, which is a pretty sweet stat line for a 2-drop. And the fact that it's a Yeti is just a nice bonus. So if there's any like proactive or mid-rangey Yeti tribal deck, this is for sure gonna be a 2-drop alongside Champion of Fury. I'm pretty sure about that. Like a 2/2 flying is just a pretty good deal for 2. And in limited, basically the same. If you have a bunch of Yetis, this card's pretty amazing. Without Yetis, a 2-cost 1/1 flyer is just a bit too weak. Next we have Daring Pioneer, another Explorer. Probably though not an Explorer you want to put in your dinosaur deck, because you just want to have a bunch of cheap Explorers, utility Explorers for your dinosaurs and Evelina, and then just play all the dinosaurs and start playing dinosaurs on turn 3, for example. But a 4/4 Overwhelm for 3 is pretty nice, and the ability is an upside and a downside at the same time, basically, given that against some decks this makes it really easy to kill the 4/4 and makes it virtually smaller, like a Varus favor kills it just like False Prince, for example. But on the other hand, against spell light decks that have a couple of high impact, expensive key spells, this can be a real pain for them. Like for example, imagine a Harsh Roll deck that has a Harsh Roll and no other spell. And then you have this guy out protecting your board, this girl out protecting your board. That's pretty annoying, for example. So yeah, it's an interesting card with a lot of things going on, and we'll have to see if and if it finds a home and what that home is, and if it also might be appealing as a sideboard card in some decks and some matchups. But all in all, an interesting constructed card, and a limited, a 3-cost 4/4 Overwhelm, even with a mostly downside, is a pretty good deal. Next we have Electrop. This card is just really bad, it's not remotely constructed playable, and it's also pretty bad in draft. First of all, costing 3 is a lot, and all we get in the end is a unit curse, and it's gonna deal 1 damage to the unit's owner, so only even as long as the unit is around. So you basically put this on a unit, and then the opponent can just attack you with it, and if you can't block it without killing it, you just kill your own curse. And even if you don't kill your curse and can block the unit without it dying, you effectively just deal 1 damage to the enemy each turn, and that's usually really not gonna matter enough and be worth a card, and especially not 3 power. That card is just bad. Next we have Lastlight Druid, another of the more curious Nightfall cards. 3-cost 1/5 with Nightfall on summon, and when you play a unit at night, Lastlight Druid basically uses unstable form on them. It transforms them into a random unit that costs 1 more. So basically this could be interesting in, say, a Shimmer Pack take that might make good use of this with a bunch of summon effect units with that usually mean they have lower stats for their power cost, making them prime units to be transformed just the same way as with unstable form. And yeah, once again, though, you have to have night for this, and you have to have Nightfall, so this is usually going to be a 1-turn deal in a deck like Shimmer Pack, for example, or you're going to have to be a Nightfall-centric deck, and then once again, I don't think you want your units to be transformed into random units of a higher cost, simply because there's too many units that are way worse than most constructed units, since only the overstated, undercosted units mostly make it into constructed aside from utility units, and there's a ton of weaker units in each cost range. So most of the constructed units, especially the non-utility units, will be already above average of the cost range they are in, and still better than a lot of units in the next cost range are, unfortunately. So yeah, it's a pretty big gamble most of the time. In draft, this might be nice. A 1/5 blocks pretty well, and you can cycle through your weaker units and hope to get something broken that randomly wins you the game. Next we have Nocturnal Nocturnal Observer. This is a pretty interesting one. It's basically a 3-cost 2/3. Once again, some Nightfall enabling here. More defensive blocking unit, but it has a pretty nice ability. It basically turns into an old school looter during night. You can just exhaust it, draw a card, and then discard a card. Just like looters used to do in other card games, for anyone that played, say, Magic, for example. This is the first looter that doesn't cost any power to activate, which makes them a ton better, but the problem is it's a pretty conditional thing, and the types of decks that want looters probably won't be able to run that many Nightfall enablers to constantly use this, but you can theoretically use it twice. You can play it, use it right away, and then use it again the next turn. And this might be an interesting card in, say, a Reanimator type deck like the Tavort Reanimator deck that I recorded a while ago. And a 3-cost 2/3 with some utility is a pretty decent unit in a slower deck. So feel free to pick it up, especially if you have more Explorer or Nightfall synergies. And the last card for the second part is Snowford. It's basically the counterpart to the Fire Relic that gave +1/+0 for 4. This gives +0/+1 for 3 to all your units permanently. So a bit better in the sense that it's cheaper, but the question is how much the +1 health is gonna matter, and if you want more effects like this than Obelisk, for example, especially weaker effects. So I'm not sure if this is gonna be making a splash in Constructed anywhere at any point in time. And in Draft, especially if your deck is more on the defensive side, this might be appealing because 1 more health can make a big difference in how well your units block and stall the opponent. So it might be worth putting in your deck. I'm not 100% sure how good it's going to be though. Alright, that's it for the second part. Stay tuned for more cards in the third part. Don't go anywhere.